Thank you for joining us this week on Strange Pathways. I'm your host, Scott Mort. I have just a tiny bit of a cold. I've been fighting the sniffles all weekend. It's not too bad, all things considering, in the time that we're living through right now. Most of us are living through, hopefully. Please be safe out there. Please be very, very safe. It's a very dangerous and strange time. But a little case of the sniffles has not kept me from having just the most wonderful weekend. It was fantastic. My wife and I, we went for a beautiful drive around the Chilbolton Dam here in Pennsylvania. No sightings of the local ghost there. It seems like every place here in Pennsylvania has a ghost, and the Chilbolton Dam is no exception. People say they see a skeletal, ghoul-like man holding a lantern outside, and there's even a few videos that look somewhat dubious, but who am I to say? Afterwards, for a bit of goofy fun, we went and saw the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile on Saturday, got our picture taken in front of it, had an absolute blast. Hey, real quick, before we start with the main stories, there's a bit of mysterious media that I'm hoping some of our listeners can shed some more light on. This photo, and I'm going to make it the photo of the YouTube video. I'm going to make it the cover of the podcast. This is taken from Brad Steiger's, and yes, I know I do drink from Brad Steiger's well quite often. This is taken from Brad Steiger's book, Mysteries of Time and Space. Now, the image, for those of you who can't see it, it's a very poorly photographed image of a TV set with a outstretched hand coming down from the top, palm up. The story in the book, and the only thing that I can find about it, was a woman in Minnesota was watching her husband wrap presents on Christmas Eve in 1968. Now, she noticed an outstretched hand appear on the TV, which was turned off at the time. She grabbed her camera, and remember, we're talking 1968 technology, but she grabbed her camera and took the photo that you're seeing, if you are seeing it, before the hand faded away. Now, a lot of theories have been put forth to me as to what's going on. Now, this might be an example of instrumental transcommunication. You see that all the time. The Spiricom device, EVPs, the ghost boxes, the incredible work that Huff Paranormal is doing right now. Now, it could also be a burnt-in image. It could be a reflection. It might be a hoax. But I would love to know more about this photo. I'm absolutely curious about it. And these folks had to have family. And I'm sure that right now, someplace in Minnesota, or who knows where, there's a family talking about that creepy time that the hand appeared on the TV set. Now, our first story is going to take us all the way back to ancient Egypt. There is really no definite time that the first UFO sightings occurred on Earth. Of course, you do have stories from the Bible, like Ezekiel's wheel, the wheel within a wheel, that could be conveyed as some sort of extraterrestrial visit. I'm sure cavemen looked up and saw craft in the sky. They might have thought of it as gods or just another animal. There is, in Egypt though, there was discovered the Tully Papyrus. Now, this may be the first evidence of ancient UFOs. This encounter occurred sometime around 1480 BC. Now, during its 18th dynasty, Egypt was at the very peak of its power. That dynasty was known as the Thutmose dynasty. There were about 4 pharaohs named Thutmose. Now, the Tully Papyrus describes the huge UFO sightings that occurred during the reign of Thutmose III. Now, the Tully Papyrus itself is named after Alberto Tulli. He was the director of the Egyptian section of the Vatican Museum. One day in 1933, he was walking through a bazaar in Cairo, and he saw this piece of papyrus in an antique shop. Now, it was too expensive for him to buy, so he made a copy of it. Now, that copied version, it allowed the skeptics to challenge its authenticity. But it did become viral amongst fans of ancient astronauts, ufologists. This text has been translated twice, 2 times. The first time was by Italian nobleman Prince Boris de Ratchwaltz. That was fun to say. And anthropologist R. Cedric Leonard did the second translation. Now, the Ratchwaltz translation goes as such. In the year 22 of the 3rd month of winter, the 6th hour of the day, among the scribes of the House of Life, it was found that a circle of fire was coming in the sky. It had no head. The breath of its mouth emitted a foul odor. Its body was 1 rod in length and 1 rod in width. It had no voice. It came towards His Majesty's house. Their heart became confused through it, and they fell upon their bellies. They went to the king to report it. His Majesty ordered that the scrolls located in the House of Life be consulted. His Majesty meditated on all these events which were now going on. Thereupon, they went up higher, directed to the south. Fishes and volatiles fell down from the sky. It was a marvel never occurred since the foundation of this land. Caused His Majesty to be brought incense to pacify the hearth. What happened in the book of the House of Life to be remembered for the eternity. Now, there are those that would say, well, this is just a meteor, a shooting star, a circle of fire. I don't think people realize how advanced the ancient Egyptian culture was. They probably, in most respects, were not more advanced than us, but in other respects, they're obviously more advanced than us. Go look at the pyramids. They are wonders of architecture. A lot of people think, oh, well, aliens built the pyramids. I really don't believe so. I really do not believe so. Just because a culture is ancient doesn't mean that it's stupid or that it can't be more progressive. That's not the right word. More advanced than we are now. There is an incredible invention from those days called Greek fire. It was a weapon of war. The more water you threw on Greek fire, the hotter it burned. It decimated armies. To this day, we do not know how to make Greek fire. We have some sort of idea. We know what a few of the compounds were that were used, but we cannot make it. In terms of Greek fire, and probably a lot of other inventions and discoveries, the ancients were more advanced than we are now. With their knowledge of astronomy, the Egyptians would have never mistaken a meteor, a shooting star, a falling asteroid, a comet as a circle of fire. Never. Going ahead to 1968, the United States Air Force funded the Condon Committee, a UFO project. While preparing the Condon report, Edward Condon himself investigated the Tully Papyrus. They asked the Vatican for the original document, but received a reply that the papyrus Tulli is not the property of the Vatican Museum. It's disappeared. It's no longer traceable. A little bit of further research found that Alberto Tulli had left all of his property to his brother, who was a priest in the Lateran Palace. It's more than likely that the papyrus was passed to this priest, but this priest died shortly after his brother, and all of his belongings were passed on to his family. As heartbreaking as it is, the Tully Papyrus could have been thrown out in the garbage. It might have been burned in a pit. They would have looked at it and thought it just a strange scrap of paper. It kind of makes one think, what other oddities, what other strange wonders, what other discoveries, what scientific advancements have been thrown out, trashed, walked by? A little fun aside. The other week, I was doing research for this very show, and I was looking through my vast library, these hundreds and hundreds of books that I've amassed over the years, for one specific book. Couldn't find it. Could not find it. Couldn't even remember the title. I remember that it was about paranormal phenomena. I knew the cover was slightly blue, and that it had a group of men on the front who had wings instead of arms. Couldn't find it. Couldn't remember the title to even look it up. Finally, I remembered the title, Earth's Secret Inhabitants. A few years ago, I had to move in a hurry. I ended up leaving a lot of stuff behind. And I thought, oh no, was this book, one of my favorite books, was this book left behind? Am I going to have to buy this book again? But I figured it was, I bought it for 15 cents at a Goodwill whenever I was 18 or 19 years old. Shouldn't be that much. Old paperback novel. I get on eBay and I find out that the sole copy they have on eBay is $95. I had this treasure and didn't know that it was treasure. It meant a lot to me. And even whenever I did eventually find the book in my collection, I was so relieved that I still had it. I have no intention of selling my copy of Earth's Secret Inhabitants, even though I could get a nice $100 bill out of it. That's my copy. That means something to me. Might not have meant so much to a lot of people. A lot of my books are absolutely falling apart. I have another Frank Edwards book here, Strange People, that the pages are falling out of, but that's my copy. It's a treasure to me. And it hurts somewhere deep down in my soul that the Tully Papyrus was probably tossed. Be careful with what you toss. Once it's gone, once it's burned, once it's trashed, it's probably not going to come back. The radio telescope was modernized in Puerto Rico, November 16th, 1974, Arecibo Observatory. How do you celebrate that extraordinary of an event? You do something extraordinary. These astronomers recorded a signal lasting 169 seconds and sent it to the star cluster M13. M13 would get the message in 25,000 years. But it seems like an answer came much, much earlier. In 2001, a mysterious crop formation appeared in a field next to a telescope in Chilbolton, Great Britain. These weren't crop circles, though. These weren't fractals, geometric patterns. There was something meaningful about this message. It looked like the message we sent. It turned out this message, carved into a field, almost completely repeats the sent signal, with a few exceptions. In the radio message sent from Earth, the numbers of the atomic elements, the bricks of life, were encrypted. Carbon, that sort of thing. We are carbon-based elements. In this message, silicon is inserted. It is theoretically possible that life could be based off silicon. Phosphorus-based life, silicon-based life, it is all possible. We are carbon, but silicon is very close to carbon. In addition, it is possible to decipher the number of chains in the alien DNA, which is more than 4 billion, and the population of this race, more than 12 billion. Now, a lot of skeptics are doing the argument that the aliens physically could not give an answer. Radio signals move at the speed of light, so from 1974 to 2001, this message would only cover a distance of about 27 light years. So you got to cut that in half. So like 13 and a half years. Whatever caught this was 13 and a half years, and then 13 and a half years back, assuming they decoded it right away. But there are explanations too. Not just that 14 years, 13 and a half. Maybe a star system on the way to M13 intercepted the message. Or maybe those aliens have developed entangled transmitters in different parts of space. Listening beacons. In quantum mechanics, you can entangle particles. Meaning that if a particle moves a certain way, let's say it's spinning clockwise, a particle on the other end of the universe will start spinning clockwise. It is entangled. It isn't shackled to the speed of light. It happens instantaneously. So, using that technology, if you have a quantum receiver / transmitter that picks this message up, it could pick up messages from all sorts of civilizations and then also send it back very, very quickly. So somewhere in the 27 light years from Earth, maybe a quantum transmitter receiver is located and picked up this message, sent it back, and then they instantly sent it back to us. I think one of the most interesting people in ufology that ever was Phil Schneider. Phil Schneider was an engineer and geologist that worked for the U.S. government and started to make appearances at UFO conventions in the 1990s. He claimed that he played a large role in the creation and construction of deep underground military bases. Think, kind of like what's under Area 51. Phil always said that his job was to figure out what explosives and materials they could use to construct these military bases underground. Phil also said that he survived an attack between troops and aliens in Dulce, New Mexico, underground. You can call BS on that. You can find it interesting. But Phil Schneider was missing toes on his feet. He was missing fingers on his hand that he said was shot off by a plasma weapon. That's a long way to go to fake something. I believe Phil Schneider was silenced. But more on that later. In 1995, Philip Schneider released a photograph of a man. He had met with this man whenever he built underground military bases. This man's name was Valiant Thor, who was supposedly an alien from Venus, who had worked for the government since the 1950s. Now, there are several photos of Valiant Thor circulating on the internet. The two most popular. Honestly, the two men don't look a lot alike. The photo that I know of, the very first photo that I've seen of Valiant Thor, shows a man of about 25, sleek black hair. The second photo shows an older man, much more pronounced chin, with short gray hair. Honestly, looks more than a little bit like the actor Bruce Campbell. Physiologically, Schneider said Thor was very different from humans, even though he looked very, very human. He allegedly had 6 fingers on each hand, a gigantic heart, one huge lung. And instead of iron-based blood like humans have, his blood was copper-based. Thor was supposedly fluent in 100 languages. His age was supposedly about 500 years. And I recently discovered what seems to be a third picture of Valiant Thor. Interestingly enough, whenever I looked at this picture, and we're dealing with old photos, and I'll put these photos up on the Strange Pathways Facebook page. Come on over, comment. Whenever I count the knuckles on this guy's hand, Valiant Thor is kind of seated, and he's got his hand on his lap. And I'm talking about the hand that has the watch on it right now. I'm counting the knuckles, and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 knuckles and a thumb. His hand is kind of folded, closed around a pen, or kind of cradling the documents. Once again, like I said, it's hard to see. But interestingly enough, I do count 5 knuckles, meaning he would have 6 fingers, if you include the thumb. Schneider was certain Thor knew a ton of government secrets, one of which was that the U.S. government had a device that caused earthquakes. Another was that the AIDS virus was developed in a Chicago laboratory as a tool to control humanity. I mean, if you really think about it, if you were going to control humanity and you wanted to create a virus, you'd want a virus that weakened the immune system so that other opportunistic diseases would take place, would invade and attack for you. You'd want something sexually transmitted to make us a little hesitant to procreate. Valiant Thor also said an alien invasion of Earth was soon to take place. There do seem to be an awful lot of UFO sightings lately. There really seems to be a lot of government admission to UFOs. In 1995, Schneider said that over 22 years, 11 of his best friends who knew something about the UFO hush-up, the government conspiracy, were killed, but declared as suicides. For example, Schneider had a friend, Ron Rummel. He had previously served in the Air Force. According to the official version, Rummel shot himself in the mouth with a pistol. No blood or fingerprints were found on the gun lying nearby. The suicide note found next to the body was written by a left-handed person, even though Rummel was right-handed. Not a lot of people took Phil Schneider seriously. January 17th, 1996, Phil Schneider was found dead in his apartment. Suicide. The official cause of death is suicide, even though signs of torture were left on the body. The most unbelievable part of the story, to me personally, is not that Phil Schneider worked with aliens, was not that he was attacked by aliens, or that he worked for the U.S. government, or that he was silenced. The part that I find hardest to believe is that Valiant Thor was from Venus. The temperature on Venus is about 400 degrees. The atmospheric pressure 100 times higher than that of Earth. How would something survive in that? Let's go back to our first story. Silicon-based life forms. Theoretically speaking, silicon-based life forms would be a lot sturdier. Their lifespan would probably be a lot longer. It's an interesting thought that this crop circle, this message, could be tied in to Phil Schneider, the story of Valiant Thor. It's been a little space heavy. It's been a little space heavy this episode. So for our last story, we're going to go over to the X boards on 4chan. There is a beautiful thread going on right now over there. I'm going to clean up the language here. If you're very, very sensitive, you probably should not go over to the 4chan X boards. I'm going to clean this up. There is a thread over there, though, currently, called I Grew Up in a Haunted House and Other Experiences. So, the author of this thread gives a little bit of background info. Number one, his mom's side of the family seems to be a magnet for strange stuff. Number two, his dad's side of the family is more than half Native American. Now, the haunted house that he lived in was built around 1909. And there's several buildings on the property, but the oldest building on the property, which is now the garage, but formerly a carriage house, was built in the 1890s. Wherever this building is, it's one of the oldest buildings in his area. And it actually predates the founding of the town that he's in. There is some minor remodeling to the interior, but it's pretty much original. There's one other notable feature. There's an 80-foot pepper tree in the backyard that predates the house. Now, he said that whenever his parents first bought the place, around 30 years ago, it was being used as a crack house, drugs, prostitution. And his father, who, mad respect for his dad had to remove a dealer slash pimp at gunpoint after he purchased the place, threatening the dealer slash pimp with a gun. He clarifies as well, he currently lives in the house and he can take pictures. And I will post a few of these pictures that he's taken on the Strange Pathways Facebook page. So his first story is, this is about 6 years after his parents purchased the house. He's about 4 or 5 years old, and he's playing by himself in his mother's office, which his mother could only get through by going through his bedroom. He hears this voice coming from a corner that sounds like a little kid. And it says, "Hi, I'm Spencer. Do you like to play?" He's 4 or 5. He doesn't know to be scared, so he agrees to play. He rolls his ball, which reaches the middle of the room, stops, and rolls back. His mother walked into the office and asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm playing with my friend Spencer, who lives in the wall." But she can't, imaginary friends, what have you. But then the ball rolls back, rolls past this gentleman, and then rolls back into the office to his mother. And they both hear a child laughing. His mom freaks out, screams, throws out the ball, and makes the child promise to never play with anyone he can't see again. He goes through a list of the spirits that are in the house. One he calls the farmer, who is an older man dressed like a rancher. He's generally in the hallway or in the carriage house. He minds his own business. There are the 1920s people, which is a full-blown party of about 6 to 8 people with music, talking, laughing, dancing in the attic, which the attic currently doesn't have a floor. They only have a party up there a few times a year in the fall. There is the drowned woman, who is a woman who looks like some kind of stripper or prostitute that is drenched like she was in the rain. She hangs out in his bedroom. He would have to pretend to sleep when he would see her at night. The drowned woman would watch him sleep. Sometimes she would cry or talk about how much she misses her child. And he said even though the drowned woman is well-meaning, she's terrifying. But then he also talks about the voice, which is a deeply unsettling, hostile male voice. And it manifests wherever it wants. It yells sounds, not words, just sounds. And they kind of mutate. They kind of form into like pig sounds. But if you make fun of it, it runs off. There's another one called the Tall One, who is 8 feet tall, pitch black, and hooded. Absolutely terrifying. But it behaves like a bored teenager. It turns lights on and off, puts things in dumb places, it empties entire cupboards in seconds, stacks the contents of the middle of the room. But sometimes it will create things that you need, that you know for a fact you don't have. Small tools, gloves, batteries, the amount of change that you need. And it can be found on the entire property. There are the Twiggy Men. They can be found on the entire property, usually outside. They're about 2 feet tall, greenish brown skin, long fingers and toes. They wear cloaks with little itty bitty eye holes. They steal entire plates of food. And he says, I cannot let my blankety-blank Burger King out of my sight. He has to keep a second Whopper on his person to make sure that he keeps it. They also like the red, orange-colored candy. And they're the Twiggy Men apparently are the most likely to be seen. In the attic, there's an apparition he calls Bright Eyes. It's a very dark figure, moves on all fours, and has bright eyes. It's active in the spring, and it makes it impossible to use the attic at night. It's very territorial. There is one he calls 40s guy. He's kind of seen near the basement. He's dressed in a business suit. He smokes, sits around, just giving you dirty looks. There's one he calls the Shape, which he says is in the basement. A mass of limbs, darkness, moaning. It's just this floating ball of arms and legs. In his parents' bedroom, you can find the rabbit-headed woman. It's this woman dressed like a priestess with the head of a rabbit, mainly there in the afternoon. This one kind of grabbed my attention. It made me think back to, if you're familiar with it, the Bell Witch case. And how, like, they saw a strange creature who had the body of a dog, the head of a rabbit. I actually have a friend that lives, if you will humor me this little aside, I have a friend who lives near the Bell Witch property. We might have him on. His name's Chase. Wonderful man. We might have him on, talk a little bit about his experiences at the Bell Witch Cave. Back to the story here. He says you can also find in his parents' bedroom the rotting man, which is the corpse of a man. Never says anything, just lays and sits in the corner and does not move. And the last one that he sees often is the 1950s housewife. He's mainly in the kitchen and the living room. And if she's in a bad mood and there's another woman in the house, she'll shove the other woman. If a woman is sleeping there, she'll stand over the women while they're sleeping and give them vivid nightmares of their husbands leaving them. However, he does say that they smell nice. The only information that he's given us about this location is that it's in the United States and California. The information he gives about himself is that he's around 30 years of age. The author starts to describe the farmer. He says he's about 50, tan, dressed in overalls with a wide-brimmed straw hat. And the joke in the family is that he kind of dresses like the author's father. There was one incident where his mother was getting something out of the cupboard, and the man with the straw hat had walked past her and out the back door. She thought it was the author's father. As he was passing, she told him not to take too long because lunch would be ready soon. But it turned out the father wasn't home. His father had just switched to a day shift after 10 years of doing nights. And his mother was so used to him being home during lunch that she just mistook the ghost for his father. Now he goes on to describe the 1920s people. He says he's only heard them about 6 times personally. But you would be home alone, watching TV, doing something like that, listening to music. You turn it off to go do something else, and you would hear muffled music and talking coming from the attic. Men and women, about 6 or 8 people. It continues for about an hour, or until you open the attic to check. There had been a room rented to a family friend in the house, so that travel could happen. Someone could keep an eye on the house. He needed a place to live. And he gets a call saying that there's a party going on in the attic. And he goes, yeah, you got to get used to that sort of thing living there. The 1920s people loved this guy because they would throw their parties 4 or 5 times a month while he was there. Next up was the drowned woman. He describes her as the sopping wet prostitute. She was either white or light-skinned Hispanic, around 30 years old. She only appears to children. Now, one day, he has a cousin over. They were around 9 years old. His cousin, a girl named Savannah, was in the room by herself for maybe a minute. She runs out of the room screaming. And will not visit again. After that, she refuses to leave the car whenever she visits to enter the house. Now the voice. His mother experienced the voice several times too. You would be minding your own business, and then right behind you, very loudly, layered animal sounds for 30 seconds or a minute. It would like to do it if you were on a ladder, balancing on a chair. If you try reading the Bible at it, it makes it worse. But if you really start laying into it, if you insult it, scream at it, call it dirty names, it'll get offended. Leave. He was about 15 years old. He's in his bedroom. And this thing starts to act up. And it's really loud. It's aggressive this time. He gets so angry. And he starts screaming at this thing. He goes on a rant, which I cannot repeat here, will not repeat here. But apparently he offended this thing so much, he said it made the most offended white woman sounding, and stopped. Now he says 1940s guy just smoked cigarettes on the back porch. He reeks of tobacco. If you look at him and give a hint that you don't like the smell of smoking, he'll give you a dirty look, take one last drag, and vanish. But if you are a smoker, he will occasionally leave you half an unfiltered cigarette if you're having a bad day. And apparently, the author is a smoker. He said it's very smooth and high quality, but he still prefers his brand. One person asked him if he ever tried to get rid of them. And he said 2 priests, 1 Catholic, 1 Orthodox, a witch doctor, a rabbi, and a half or dozen or so pastors. Most would recommend moving. The Orthodox priest said that they should burn the house down. I've got to admit, this sounds very LARPy. This sounds like somebody just making up a story. It would be one thing. It would be one thing if it was just one of these. But to have this whole congregation of ghosts so active, it feels like a LARP, a live action role play for those that don't know. Just pretending to do something, doing a story. And you know what? I guess that's okay. Those can be fun. Those can be real fun. This is fun. I hate to think, though, there's something terrifying about this. That somehow, some way, all these spirits ended up trapped here. And these aren't residual hauntings, where it's like a tape playing over and over. These are active hauntings. These are intelligent. These are sentient things. They leave gifts. They take things. They are active. They try to make things happen. Are there spots on this earth that cause things to be trapped in them if you die on or near them. Is it like a glue trap for the paranormal? It is a terrifying thought. One likes to think that after we die, we go on to our just reward or punishment. But the thought that we could be stuck here, rarely seen, never reuniting with the ones we love, just adhered to this earth like an insect on a roll of flypaper. The thought of it terrifies me. I've lost a lot of family. I've lost a lot of friends. And the thought that keeps me going some days is that if I'm a good person, if I play by the rules of the ethics of which in my heart I know to be correct and fair and good, that whenever I move on, whenever I let loose of this body and move on to the next world, that my loved ones, my family, my friends, my mother and father will be there waiting for me. And that I'll turn around and my wife will be waiting there for me too. My wife is still alive, but my wife will meet up with me. I'm under no illusions that I will die before her. Women live longer than men. I'm a bit older than my wife. So I am under no illusions that I will not go before her. But the thought that I could be walking down the street, die of a heart attack, and stuck to the place I died just because it happens to be some sort of paranormal flypaper terrifies me. It's a little disturbing to me too, if I may go off on one final rant. It's a little disturbing to me too that parapsychology does not get the weight that it deserves to in our society. This is something I believe should be studied. Studied hard. Because it is the one event every human on this planet will share. None of us have the answer. What happens to us after we die? But we're all going to find out. Thank you for joining me this week again on Strange Pathways. Please review the podcast, tell a friend, get out there, mention us on boards. Word of mouth is the heartbeat of any podcast. If you'd like to get in contact with me for any reason, you can do so at strangepathwaysmail@gmail.com. Head on over to Facebook, like and comment on YouTube. Thank you once again so much for joining me here this week. Take care of yourselves and each other.